For some anglers, carp fishing is an obsession, a way of life. For many others, it's a new area of sport fishing, just waiting to be discovered. My name's Matt Hayes, and I'm here in Ontario, Canada, to explain the simple tactics that will help you catch your first big carp. Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I've already mentioned to you the principle of the hair rig, but you might be wondering, well, how the heck do I get the bait onto the hair? And I'll show you now. It's fairly simple. So I've got here a mixture of real maize, stuff that I've plucked out of the bucket that I'm using for baiting up, but I've also got some grains of plastic sweet corn, and they're buoyant. They have an interesting dynamic on the rig, but I'll come to that in a minute. Basically, what you've got to do is to put the bait onto the needle. So I'm going to put on a piece of plastic corn, followed by, I'm going to make a sandwich here, a piece of real maize that I've just taken out of the bucket, put that on the needle, and then I'm going to add another top shot of plastic corn. So I've now got 3 baits on the needle. I'm going to hook the end of the needle, the pointy bit, onto the loop at the end of the hair like this, pull it tight, and then slide all 3 baits down onto the hair, which is great. Take the needle out now. One small problem, if we cast with any force, these baits are going to come off the hair. I've got a little bit of plastic. It's called a rig stop or a bait stop. You can buy them in the tackle shop. And I'll just put it through the loop and then pull the top bait up tight against it. And now I've got a lovely little stack of corn. Now, because this is buoyant, I've added a small BB shot just a few centimetres away from the hook. And what will happen is that's just enough weight to sink this bait down. It will sit on the deck like this and it will waft around. It's really important this, because when carp come and feed in a swim, the turbulence created by their large bodies as they manoeuvre themselves around under the water actually causes the free bait to swirl around slightly and lift off the bottom. And if your hook bait can mimic that behaviour, it's got a much greater chance of being taken. So this is what we call a popped up bait. So it's buoyant and it needs counterbalancing with this small shot to make it sit just off the bottom. It's a deadly rig. I've been baiting up the area behind me with a mixture of rice and maize, and I can see by the clouding in the water that there are fish there. So I'm going to try and catch one really quickly. And more importantly, I'm going to do it without another rod, without all the alarms and bivvies and the whole shebang that you see in modern carp fishing. Believe me, you can still catch carp on one rod without all the electronics and all the gadgets. And I'm going to try and prove that now. It will really pay you dividends whenever you go carp fishing if you employ stealth by the water. And in this case, this is a very tricky swim to approach. So I'm going to do it on the hands and knees, even for baiting up. I've been baiting this area for a little while, and I know fish are coming in and out of it regularly now. So I don't want to put too much bait in this time. I'm putting in some maize and rice, just a few boilies in over the top. Feed it quite close in. Well, the smell of all that rice and maize and slightly fermented in the sun now, that's really going to draw the fish in. And I like the cloud it creates as the bait settles, that kind of milky cloud from the rice mixed with, I guess it must be infused with that scent of maize as well. So I don't think it'll be long before the fish are rooting down there. So I'm going to get the bait bucket out leave my rod, and I'll crawl back in when I think it's time to just lower a bait over the edge. Okay, so come on, let's go and get nearer to the swim if we can. It's really important that you don't skyline the swim. The fish are very close, so I'm going to be well back from the water's edge here. Probably about this far is good enough. Now I just want to repeat, I'm using a ready tied rig here that I bought in the shop. There are so many good ones around now of all different brands, and some of them are really, really top notch. It's not like the old days when they were inferior and you had to make your own. Nowadays you can buy good stuff straight off the shelf. So there's that simple rig that I've made up, put the bait on, and now all I'm going to do is lower this bait into the margin. I've been feeding this area up with maize and rice, and I know that carp are coming in and out, so I'm hoping that I'm going in between visits actually. But I'm just going to go out here and lower the hook bait in so I don't disturb any fish. And then what I'm going to do now, you might be thinking, well, where's your alarm? I'm not going to use one. If a fish takes at this close range, it's just going to rip away from me. The line's going to go tight. The rod tip's going to start to go. The reel's locked up. I've got it on a fighting drag, so basically I've got to stay by the rod. You can't leave this rod unattended because the carp will just drag it in. So if you're going to fish this style, don't leave your rod for a second. Always by it. Now what we've got to wait for is for the fish to come in close and hopefully snaffle that rig, and I don't think it will take long. It's under the rod tip now, it's right over the rig. Yep, there you go, there's the blind bite, look. Yep, he's on. Whoa! That fish was trying to flatline me then. I was pulling hard to try and get a curve in the rod, because if they flatline you and the line takes all the tension, you're in trouble. But I was just trying to get the rod straight, and that fish was having absolutely none of it. Oh, I love this one. Come on. Yeah, come on, come on, come on, come on. What a fight, eh? Ooh. Oh, he's trying for that jetty again. Got to turn him. Here he comes. Come on, baby. Try and scoop him. Get in there. Yeah. Still got it, you know. Well, that was absolutely heart-stopping. I don't know about for you, but it was for me. What an experience. And a nice fish as well. Look at that. There he is. Lovely. Oops. Well, there it is. There's the boilie. I'll just take that out. Where's the rig? There's the rig right in the corner. Just where you want it. Wasn't going to come out of there, and you don't get a fight much more brutal than that one. Well, this is a nice long lean fish, just the sort of tussle you'd get off a fish like this one. He's built for speed, and boy did he take off. That was absolutely electrifying, and catching carp at close quarters like that, whew, it's heart-stopping stuff. But it happens quite often here in Ontario, and I've really, really enjoyed this afternoon. It's blisteringly hot, so I'm going to get the fish back. Catching carp at close quarters is always great fun, and the hard-fighting, mostly uncaught fish that live in so many of the waters in Canada are something else. But if you're travelling to Canada for the first time and you're concerned about the sheer volume of lakes and rivers to target, you could do a lot worse than seek out some local advice. Will Muskets is a Canadian carp angler who's been fishing the waters of Ontario for years, and what he doesn't know about the area just isn't worth knowing.
I started carp fishing back in 2011. I'd had plenty of exposure, to the fish, seeing it at my grandparents' cottage up in Sandy Lake, right here in the Kawarthas. And I'd seen them in like Port Hope, Port Perry, everywhere. I'd seen these carp everywhere. And I always thought to myself, that's a fish that's far too big for me. But in 2011, it was my first year of university. I was attending Trent University, and the Otonabee River literally flowed right through the middle of the campus. Came down one morning and saw a double figure carp swimming right through the margins, and I was thinking, I could have that. And I tried. I didn't get it, obviously. Kind of flubbed up on that one pretty good. But I tried, a little bit later on in the year, especially after university was done. And sure enough, I actually managed my first carp. And since then, it's just become an ongoing obsession. It's just been a passion of mine, and I'm carp crazy. I love it. So carp were introduced into Ontario and to most of North America in the late 1800s. Started off obviously Hudson River, New York. We're talking the Great Lakes Basin. And from there they moved up all tributaries and found themselves into just about every lake and body of water that they could find, they could get themselves into. Anything that was too cold, obviously they didn't make it into it. Maybe they decided they didn't want to be part of it. But all along the Trent Severn system, you can pretty much find common carp. So you guys in England, the pinnacle of your success is when you get that beautiful wood carving common, because obviously commons are not so common in England. Here in Canada, the common is literally almost all we have. I'd say probably 99% of the fish that we catch here are common carp. What we strive for, a lot of us anglers here in Ontario, is the mirror carp. When I show up to a new spot, which a lot of you English lads will be, you'll be coming to these new spots going, right, where do I begin, right? I start with the pre-bait. It's really important that you start with the pre-bait, because sometimes you're going to show up to a spot on the river where those carp aren't. They're not just there. You can't just throw in a rig and they're just going to take it. You're going to need to create a feeding opportunity for them. So I like to start off with sort of a triangulated baiting pattern. I start off at the top, putting in a lot of bait on my first day. I'll get out there, put in 20 pounds of maize or rice or, peanuts, whatever you seem to be, favoring in your spod mix. I put that in, I get a lot of food in there. And then I move down a level and I take back maybe 5-10 pounds. And I start putting in a little bit less bait, because now that they're there, obviously feeding on my swim, I don't want to create opportunity, I want to create competition. So then I move down to the day that I'm fishing. Let's say I chose the third day to start fishing this swim. I only put in maybe 5 pounds. I get a rig in there, and I like to get that fish right off the hop. And I think that is probably the best thing I could recommend. And obviously, if you want to get fishing on your first day, you want to arrive right off the plane and you want to start fishing right there on that first day, call a guide, call me. I can help you out with that sort of thing. I can have a spot pre-baited, be squatting on it, and when you arrive, there you are, you're fishing right off the hop. A session here, you guys like to set up in England, you'll go out for a week. Some of you are overnight kind of guys. Here in Canada, I've done really well, even short sessions. Some of my best sessions ever were back in May. Obviously, it's a good time of year. They're just coming out of the hibernation. They're looking to feed just before the spawn. And my best session, I sat with my girlfriend, and in 6 hours, we managed 18 fish between us. And it was just chaotic. I have never seen action like that. And then, of course, I've come out for 2-3 hours, managed 6 fish, right? And you can have a lot of fun in those short sessions, but sometimes the overnighter is really where it's at. And that's what I like too. I like to get out for a whole day, but sometimes it's really nice when you can get out and it's nice and calm. The lake is yours, the river's yours. There's no one else around. You look up, you see the beautiful stars above your head. And one of my best sessions ever was a 21 fish overnighter back in July, and up to 28 pounds, right? The smallest ones were just the low doubles, but it was worth every second of it. And when you put in that effort, the payoff is absolutely incredible. So you're coming over to Canada, you made the decision, you bought your ticket. Well, what do I bring? What do I need in my luggage, right? You might have a big bazooka tube that you can put your 12-foot rods into and, put in those size 14,000 big pit reels, but you don't always need that. It's important for certain bodies of water, the St. Lawrence River, for example, big, strong fighting fish, and you're gonna need big, heavy tackle for it. But let's say you show up here to Peterborough, Ontario, the Kawarthas region. The carp can sometimes be right under your rod tips. They can be that close in. So why bring a 12-foot rod when you can get away with a little 8-footer? And and use a rod that's like a 2.5, 2 3/4 test curve. Still bring in that 25-pound carp on light lines, light tackle. That's a lot more fun in my opinion. And so I get away with that sometimes. Still bring it to 12 if you want to bring the 12, by all means. The 12 is a perfect all-around rod. 3-pound test curve is what I recommend for an enjoyable fight. As for line, 15-pound mono, if you've got Puritan, and you have to fish mono because it's just in your blood, use the 15-pound mono. Up to 18-pound mono is perfect as well. In terms of end tackle, what do I like to use? I think that after fishing these waters for 6 years, what I've come up with is that you match the hook to your bait, but you want to use very strong hooks, right? Obviously, our carp fight like crazy. Wild commons, wild carp, they're aggressive. And so I like to go with a very strong tensile hook, and I like my size 4s and I like my size 2s. My size 2s for my much larger, almost donkey choker size boilies that I can throw sometimes. But for my smaller presentations, a nice size 4, get that nice turn, get that good hook hold, and that's what I'm talking about. You're back home in England, you're just starting out carp fishing, and you need to build that confidence, right? In your home waters, you might not be catching a load of fish, right? You might get 1 fish a week. But here in Canada, you can come here, you can really master the technique of baiting, you can master your accuracy, and you can master fighting fish, because at the end of the day, that's what counts. If you're looking for a lot of fish, strong fighting fish, Ontario has what you're looking for. Here in Canada, our carp have to work for their food, right? Not everybody fishes for them. We're not pumping in thousands of pounds of bait like a syndicate lake in the UK. Instead, our fish actually have to fight and compete for their food. They're eating crayfish, they're eating mollusks, and they are aggressive. When they take, There you are. Beautiful, high double, Canadian common. Check that out. Hard fighting machine this is. In Ontario, there is no limit to how big these carp can grow. There's a lot of us out here that are looking for that really big fish, because who knows what's out there.
Whatever the size Canadian carp grow to, you can bet Will won't stop searching for them. Of course, if you're going to catch carp, you'll need bait. So let's take a look at your options. This is a typical selection of modern carp baits, and I've got some of the major ones that carp anglers use all over the world. These brightly coloured baits at the front are called boilies, and they're basically quite tough skinned baits that are designed to resist the attentions of nuisance fish. But carp can easily eat them, and they do that readily, believe me. You can get them in all sorts of colours and flavours, and there are literally hundreds to choose from. One of the most important baits are the particle baits, and I've got some here. This is a mixture of maize and long grain rice. It's called a particle bait because it consists of lots and lots of tiny pieces and fragments, and they work really well. And the reason is that in nature, carp are used to finding natural food in dense concentrations, and when you put particles in the water, they mimic that because they often lie densely concentrated in a small area, and carp just love to browse over a bed of particles, just picking away at them for hours. Pellets, they're basically synthetically made food sources using various proteins, and in fact pellets are used to rear fish all over the world, so they're a very nutritious food source. You can get them in different sizes, from great big donkey chokers down to really small guys like this that have got that kind of particle principle going for them. Of course, there are many other carp baits to choose from, but I've selected what I think is some of the most important ones, and it isn't always the most complicated or the most expensive that catches the fish. Now, here in Ontario, particle baits work really, really well, which is good news because the carp here go around in huge shoals and they can eat massive amounts of food. So it would be very, very expensive to keep feeding them some of these more technical baits. Maize and rice, I think, is absolutely perfect for these carp. I'm going to put it to the test now by fishing in the lake behind me. You might be a bit shocked when you see me put this just out there. That's how close these carp will come. And it's not just here in Canada, although they are very prone to it here. If you keep quiet and sit back from the water's edge, you'd be amazed what happens. Now my second rod, I'm fishing really close in, just a rod length literally off this jetty. So that's why I sit back from the water's edge and keep quiet. Don't parade across the skyline and spook the fish. If you want to fish close in, that'll do. That literally took less than 2 minutes. I've actually been baiting this area up for the past couple of days on and off, and the other rod's going now. That's what we call a line bite, thankfully. It's just a fish swimming into the line, but that one's likely to go any second, I think. I've been baiting this area up for a while, and it's obviously given the fish a lot of confidence to come in close. But wherever you fish in the world for carp, you'll catch more at close range than long, I can tell you that for sure. You can fish more accurately at close range for a start off, and the fish love to come in close and browse the margins, grub around in all the bankside vegetation and look for food. This fish is right under the rod tip now. It's taken the popped up maize, the particle bait you were looking at earlier on. Let's see the lead bouncing around. I'll make a grab for the net while he's down there. See if I can get that. There we go. Fish is right under the rod tip here. It's quite deep off this jetty, you see. It's a very comfortable area for them to come in and browse along. Just seen a flash of gold there. I'm pretty sure this is a common carp. In the UK and Europe, common carp aren't the most common. The mirror carp is much more common. It's basically the same fish, but it's a completely different scale pattern. But over here in Ontario, 1 in every 100 fish is a mirror carp. So, whereas we tend to really prize the common carp, the locals over here regard a mirror carp as a real event. Well, the fish is up near the surface, but typical of a Canadian carp, it just won't relent. It keeps boring down towards the bottom, but I'll get it in the end. You just got to take your time. That's a nice looking fish. Well, there's the particle bait, just hanging on the corner of its jaw. Very typical Canadian carp. One of the things about these fish is that their mouths are really tough and rubbery because they're used to grubbing around in rocks on the bottom. That's where they find their natural food, and they're really well suited to it. The other thing you'll see about this Canadian carp is the size of its fins and its tail. They're really big, and these are wild fish that rarely, if ever, see an angler's bait. They exist in huge numbers here in Ontario, and they really are super fish. Well, this is a really nice corner of the lake, and what I like about it is that there's a lot of structure and many features here. This little jetty here is actually built on a stone promontory. I'll come on to that in a minute. So it slopes away really nicely into quite deep water very close in, and then a little bit further out it gets shallow again. There's a big weed bed out there. You can actually see pieces of weed on the surface, and if you cast out there keep getting stuck. So it's really good to know, because weed harbours a lot of food and it will be very attractive to the carp. And of course, by baiting up in the deeper, cooler water close to that weed structure, well, it's a perfect place to ambush a good shoal of fish. But the really interesting feature in this place, if I was struggling to catch at close range, is a bar that runs all the way out to a distant island. Now that bar actually is an old transport railway that was there, and the lake's obviously flooded since, and it's basically covered over the railway, except in parts it's still shallow enough for you to really be able to see the nature of the bottom there, and the fact that it's a big ridge or a spine that runs down the lake, terminating in this really nice gully, really deep gully between two spits. Now that's important because it means that any fish looking to navigate the lake in that area are going to get naturally funneled through that gully. So it could be a real hot spot. It's much further out to fish, and I'd rather not go to the effort unless I need to, but my word, that's a heck of a spot. Rice Lake might be a huge expanse of water. There are some very obvious features to target, but even the smallest of venues will contain areas that carp love to inhabit. Near and far bank margins, overhanging trees, gravel bars, depressions, islands and drop-offs are all likely fish holding spots, and should always be on your list of places to target when you first arrive at your choice of water. But finding carp isn't much use if you don't know how to cast to them. Casting is one of angling's greatest and most underrated skills. Let's take a look at how to do it properly. Technology is changing fishing. It's affecting all aspects of the sport, and nothing more so than carp fishing, in which technology is playing an increasing part. But where do we draw the line? Well, I'll tell you where I draw the line. I draw the line at casting. For instance, nowadays you can use a bait boat or even a drone to take your rig out and drop it in precisely the place you want it. But for me, I'll be honest, it just feels a bit like cheating. I've got no problem with other people doing it, but I like casting, and I think there's a joy in casting well. Now there are two casts I'm going to show you here. There's what I call the accurate cast and then the distance cast, and they're pretty much the same, but they are subtly different. Now let's start off with the accurate cast. Basically we're going to face our target square on, and I'm lining up now with a building. I can actually see a radio mast way off in the distance, but that's my marker for my direction. If you look at the distance between the rig and the tip of the rod, I like the distance to be around 4 feet long. Some people like it less, but that's a matter of personal choice. It won't affect the cast. This is quite a stiff-armed, rigid cast, and basically what you do is face your target square on. Obviously the lower hand is gripping the butt of the rod and the top hand is positioned up here. This hand will pull, this hand will push, but not much. This is the hand that's going to do most of the work here. This is a really simple cast. It's a square on cast in which you take the rod and you basically pretend it's a razor blade that's going to cut your head in half. And what I'm going to do now is pull with the lower hand and push slightly with the top hand from a standing start with the rod right down the centre. And that little acceleration is enough to send the lead cleanly out towards its target. That's a great cast if you cast into a spot, a marker, a feature you've identified. But when you can see fish showing at range and you just want to get a bait a long way out into the general vicinity of feeding fish, there is another cast you can use that will deliver more distance at the cost, I have to say, of a little bit of accuracy. And to make that cast, the distance cast, you've really just got to open your body out. So if I crank this lead in now, I'll show you what I mean. Now on this cast, there are a few differences. The drop from the rod tip to the lead is exactly the same. But this time, I'm not going to face the target. I'm going to face slightly sideways on, with the front foot pointing forward, and my back foot will take the weight of the cast at the beginning, and as I make the cast, the weight will shift onto the front foot. So it's a subtle movement, but that change of momentum will actually really help to accelerate the cast. So it's a shift from the right foot down to the front foot there in this case. And the body stance is open. And what that enables me to do is to bring the rod through a much greater arc. And the wider the arc you can bring the rod through, the further it's going to fly. If you can get an almost full sweep, you're going to generate a lot of power. Now, this is quite important. You're facing the right way, sideways onto the target, body stance is opened up. But to achieve maximum acceleration, rather than make a stiff-armed cast from a standing start, we're going to try and make it in one movement. In other words, we're going to bring the rig from the front right the way to the back, and it tugs just on the rod there. It's like a catapult effect. And the point at which you make the cast is as you make the back cast, there's the lead pulling on the rod. You see that? So basically, as I bring this rod back now, you can see a tug on the tip just there. Let's try that again. We bring it back. There's the tug. Now, what that's doing is it's loading the rod tip like a catapult, so that if I pull with the lower hand, at the point the rod tip dips down and let the line go, I'm going to achieve a lot of momentum. I'm using momentum and movement to create more speed in the cast. So I'm going to dip back and then let it go. And casting long should be effortless. It shouldn't be a great big swipe. It should be effortless. An accelerating movement. That's what it is. Everything's out there in position now. I've got two baits out. I've got one out to the left, just outside a tree that leans over the water. There's a lovely clean gully there with no weed on it, but weed quite close by, just the sort of place carp like to patrol. And then the further rod is much further out. So I've got a spot out there beyond a weed bed, just the other side of it, and it's a really, really nice spot. It's probably about 80 metres out from the bank. Oh, that was a little knock then. Might have been a line bite maybe, if a fish just brushing through the line as it starts to hoover up some of the bait. That's a really good sign. That's it, right. Something got hold of that. Rock there, I've just got to steer this fish over it. Oh, that's a nice one. Unusual too, it's a mirror. Nice fish. Well, this is an unusual fish out here in Ontario, because most of the fish you catch are common carp, and this is absolutely stunning looking mirror carp with really, really nice scale patterns. Very, very unusual. Look at the size of the fish's mouth. I mean, we worry about sometimes the size of the baits we use. You could get an orange in there, a satsuma at least. It's amazing. Really thick and rubbery as well for feeding on this hard rock, rooting in among the stones. The rig's just in the bottom part of its mouth there, just in the lower lip, and it comes out dead easy, which is always a bit of a bonus. Right, let's have a look at this fish now, because it's got a beautiful scale pattern. As I said before, mirror carp are very unusual. According to the local lads, probably 1 in every 100 fish is a mirror carp, so that's a proper result. And look at the fabulous scale pattern, a beautiful mahogany mirror with big plate scales, beautiful fish. Cracking way to illustrate the importance of casting. Being able to cast accurately is a really satisfying thing, and it's the shortcut really to catching a lot of fish. Well, this is an absolutely beautiful fish, really nice. I wonder if I can get him away here. He's so deep. Is he too deep for the water? No, I don't think so. I think he's good to go. Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic.